You may have heard of the hero's journey, a sort of template that most hero stories unknowingly follow. 1. The hero gets a call to action, a reason to leave status quo. 2. They refuse or doubt the call in some way. 3. They are mentored, taught both how to defeat the main villain and taught right from wrong. 4. The rising action, trial after trial, friends and enemies made. 5. The main villain is fought and the hero wins. 6. The hero returns back to status quo, but with a lesson they readily apply to life to improve their status quo. Until recently, heroes were everything. They kept us safe and happy. But stories with villains as the main characters began cropping up. Some look at familiar tales from the villain's perspective, like Maleficent, while some write a new story, just from the villain's view, like How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So why isn't there a villain's journey? Well, there is, it's just not as famous because we can't empathize with evil, usually. In fact, many of us love the villains, even if we're fairly altruistic. Once we understand how they got to their evil place, villains feel just like us. First, the villain has a call to action as well, but it is much more painful than the heroes. It often involves something or someone being hurt, often by the hero or their predecessor. Betrayal, too, is often the beginning of the villain's journey. These two events start the villain off very differently from the hero. The villain is left desperately wanting vengeance, like when Maleficent loses her wings. Second, the sort of maybe was going to be a mentor. There might be people in the world who notice the villain's pain and want to help. Like, sometimes. But the villain will, in their pride and mistrust, refuse to help. Either that, or no one will even want to help. And sometimes the mentor isn't even a mentor, they're just a friend full of empathy. Those are so annoying when you're trying to be a villain. Either way, the absence of a guide, a shoulder to lean on, is essentially the last straw for our villain. They begin to turn dark. Next, they struggle for vengeance. This is essentially rising action, with the villain going more and more dark, desperately and futilely determined. They grow in power, but they also lose the traits that once made them human. They are preparing for something, their grand revenge, the defeat of the hero. Then there's the first climax, like pre-climax. The villain somehow succeeds in their quest, finally returning the blow to the hero. They've won. Now they should be happy and content, right? Wrong. Our hero descends into despair and regret as if they just woke up from a sort of dead daze. There's no satisfaction in winning, there's only guilt. And it didn't work anyway, because the hero still seems to hold on, like when the Who's still sing, even after the Grinch has taken all their presents. The most painful part of this stage is just the fact that the hero has this strength, and the villain can't comprehend it because they're so lost. Where do you go when you feel this way? Well, you apologize. Needless to say, it doesn't work. Obviously. Last step. This can be called the climax. It's the triumph of the hero when the villain is finally defeated and finally makes amends, occasionally through death. Like when Darth Vader sort of changed at the end of the 6th movie. The interesting thing about this villain's journey is that they start almost hero-like and end a little heroic too. We literally can't sympathize with pure, unjustified evil. We can't even comprehend it. So how does this compare time-wise to the hero's journey? Well, first the villain has their inciting action, then their non-mentor, then their rising action. Either here or in the next stage, pre-climax, does the hero experience their call to action. Then, as the villain stews in guilt, the hero is mentored, faces trials, loses, faces the darkness, and then accepts the light. Finally, the main conflict and the resolve of the two stories. So why do we connect to the villain almost more than the hero? Most of us hopefully never fall so deeply into darkness. I definitely wouldn't know. I've never felt like a villain or even had any major faults. Is it just that we as humans tend to exaggerate our own minor falls from grace as something terrible? Like cheerful young Scrooge turning into an almost murderer miser? Is that why we love villain stories so much? Because we see our faults and want to know that there's some amount of respite at the end? Some amount of acceptance by others greater than us? Do villains make better role models than heroes?